Sparge. I'm the director of 516 Arts, and I'm so glad to see you here tonight. I'm just going to make a really quick intro and then turn it over to Hakim and the awesome guest panelists tonight who've come from near and far to be here. 516 Arts is a nonprofit organization. You can become a member if you like, and there are all kinds of benefits to that. And the current exhibition, Art Meets History, Many Worlds Are Born, is a two-part project. So this is part one, and the curators, Rick Cassini-Cador and Alicia Inez Guzman, organized the exhibition that came out of an educational program that we offered that was an artist lab on the subject. So artists applied to participate and did an intensive program online with the curators and guest teachers of various kinds, and worked with the Albuquerque Museum photo archives to explore bringing their own historical research into contemporary practice and really looking at their own histories, specifically focusing on New Mexico and the region. So the next part will open in June, and that's called Technologies of the Spirit. And we have several programs going on throughout this whole period that are described in our newsletter, so pick one up. And I'd like to thank our staff, Claude Smith and Kevin Paul and Daniel Ulibari, who are here tonight, for all of their work. And it's being recorded. It'll be online afterwards. And folks, all of you in person can ask questions, but also the people that are joining us online can ask questions, and Daniel will relay those if they have any. Hakim Bellamy is one of my all-time heroes. He's an incredible poet and organizer and mover and shaker. He's the inaugural poet laureate of Albuquerque and many, many other titles, but thank you for being here to moderate tonight. And Leo Vicente, Nikesha Breeze, and Gina Penn are all exhibiting artists in the show. There's an article about each of their work in the companion website, and these are the postcards for each of their projects, which have a corresponding essay online that you can read about. And I'll just acknowledge our lead funders for the project, and then I'll get out of the way. The Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Henry Luce Foundation, Lannan Foundation, National Performance Network, the fund at Albuquerque Community Foundation, the wonderful city of Albuquerque and their Arts and Culture Department, the Urban Enhancement Trust Fund, and the National Endowment for the Arts are the primary funders. So we're very fortunate to have the support to bring everyone here tonight. Without further ado, I will welcome Hakim. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Let's make some noise for our fearless leader here. Our fearless leader, Suzanne Sparge. I am equally a fan of her. She's a superhero. When I get to do an interview panel with her, you will know why if you do not already know why she's a superhero. But thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's no small thing because we are still in a pandemic, yes. And so I think it says even more that you came out tonight to support the exhibit, to support 516, and to support these amazing artists that have traveled from both near and far. And so I know I cannot do a better job of introducing them than the newsletter and the exhibition companion guide, which is the website that Suzanne mentioned. I also suspect that if you are here tonight, you already know who they are, and you're interested in hearing more from them than what you've already read. But if you haven't, we're going to give them a little bit of time to kind of say who they are, where they're from, and their work beyond the exhibit. And then we'll spend the rest of my time chatting at you specifically about this exhibit and their work in this exhibit, and then give you all time to ask questions as well. Does that sound like a plan? Does that sound like a deal? Okay. I'll stick to my end of the bargain if you stick to yours. So I'm going to start in, I was going to say alphabetical order, but not in the order that they're sitting next to me. We have Leo Vicente here, just in case you haven't had a chance to walk around the exhibit. His work is downstairs, kind of on that would be the east-facing wall before you get to the back, to the documentary, which is Nyquisha Breeze's work, and the work of her her collective, The Stages of Tectonic Blackness, Black Dumb, this particular location-based piece that's in this exhibit is about Black Dumb, and I'm just going to invoke them and bring them into the room, Nyquisha, if that's okay. Miles Tukanow and Lazarus Nance Letcher, did I have that right? Are part of that, and spend time with the documentary if you can, as well as the piece that's right in the window when you first walk in. And then kind of flanking me, stage left, is Gina Penn's work, or actually right behind us too, Gina Penn's work. And so just so that afterwards, when you're milling about, those are the points you want to get to. And I'm gonna start by kind of passing the mic to my right and just have Leo use his time. We told them that they have 10 minutes, but they're like, we're not going to use it all, and they don't have to. But just to kind of say, who you are, give them a little bit if they don't know already, and then talk about your work bigger than the exhibit and what brought you here.
So my name is Leo Vicente. I'm a member of the Hickory Apache Nation from Dulce, New Mexico, so in northern New Mexico. I'm currently teaching right now, so I got my master's in visual communication design from the School of the Art Institute. So I've been kind of designing and making exhibits for the most part, but it's always good to kind of be on the other side of that and to actually produce work that's more expressive and personal to myself. I was really happy to be invited to this collective for the Art Meets History program that we did. And I think just the whole concept and idea was really interesting to me because I was thinking about, how do we incorporate like history or histories into our work, which I was already kind of thinking of working in exhibits and how that comes into like public education, public programming. I just got to push it a little bit further this time. Having that direct connection to the Albuquerque photo archive really kind of led to this work coming through. And when I was going through the archive, I was actually looking at pieces that would I would respond to. And there's a ton of photographs in there. So there was almost too much photographs to actually work with. So I almost had to kind of figure out and go through them multiple times to see what stuck out of all of those photographs. And I kept pushing further back into time. So I was the latest I could go back was at the beginning of photography, and so that's where I started looking at ambrotypes, and it was an interesting comparison because you can see what was going on here in Albuquerque in terms of that documentation, and I would think about what was happening with my peoples, and where were they at, and what was that context outside of kind of the social areas in central New Mexico. So that's really where a lot of the ideation came from, and then doing more research, looking into further archives and publications into what was happening with the tribe and how I could connect the two. A lot of the work was really inspired by a specific battle. So it was the Battle of Cienega, which had happened in northern New Mexico on the west side of Pickery's Mountain. And so that was really kind of the parallel in what I was looking at. So in that survey, which was done by the Forest Service, they had found over 500 peeled trees or culturally modified trees or culturally significant trees. And I just thought it was amazing to have such a really dense population of peeled trees that really paralleled what was happening with the tribe. So I can identify this is where the tribe was, this is what was going on. And I was able to take that and kind of move that into a project using ambrotypes. So the piece that I put together is really portraits of trees. And so when we look at those, we're looking at them as beings, but also that relationship with nature and how we really relied on them as a form of sustenance when the war started. against the Hickory Apache. So I thought that was really meaningful, and it turned out to the work that I presented here in the gallery, which I think was really, like I said, just meaningful to me, in a lot of different ways in terms of like bringing in the history into my work, producing new works. It doesn't say on the labels, but this is actually a collaboration. So I got to work with Quinn Jacobson, who's a really amazing photographer who does ambrotype photography. And then I also paired with my other good friend, Kevin Beltran, who is amazing photography, who I also worked with when I was here working at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. So it was just great to come together as a community and produce this work. And it speaks kind of on a lot of different levels. So I really like that. Not only like very meaningful to me and my people, but also like adding to the stories here in New Mexico, and then being socially engaging as well. I thought that when we actually think and pick apart the piece, we can actually look at a lot of different elements, which questioning the medium, the materiality, the narratives. So I felt it was successful in my opinion. But I think that gives like a good kind of context outside of the work, and I think there's definitely more content on the satellite website too as well, which I think is great for people to kind of dig deeper into the work, because you actually understand the context of the work, which is really important. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And some of those ideas we're going to talk about, because I took them directly from the site. The idea of like the trees as culture, right? Trees as both sustenance and a form of communication across generations. Yeah, we're going to get way far out here. Y'all wait. And so let's taking Leo's lead. Thank you, Leo. I'm gonna give Nyquisha Breeze the mic to also tell you a little bit about where she's from and her work, broader than what she's presenting in this exhibition, but also giving a little context about what's part of the exhibition as well.
Thank you, Hakim. And I also want to, just in naming the collaborators of the part of the work that's showing here is the filmmaker MK, who is a brilliant filmmaker. And if you have not had a chance to see the work downstairs yet, you get a chance to see the flavor of what they bring. So my name is Nyquisha Breeze, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I work in a lot of different mediums, and in kind of looking at the totality of my work, there's a very common thread, and that I think is the kind of reason I'm here today too, is because so much of my work is about what I call this reclamation process in working with history, and in particular erased and invisibilized or obscured narratives that we understand as a people, and particularly as African diasporic and indigenous peoples, and people who have been at the whim of the greater picture of heteronormative patriarchy and capitalism, that have truly broken down and separated our histories out from our stories. We know that most everyone only knows the smallest bit of what the truths are. That the history is, as the saying is, right, is made by the victors. But what I find in my work and what my direction is to actually change that narrative, to actually recognize that there is an incredibly profound wealth of knowledge in our histories that is there for us, to really see, to pull up, to reclaim, to retell, and to remake, as a people. And so my work focuses on that. Like, what are the ways we do that? How do we do that? What does it look like? What does it look like to dig into our archives? What does it look like to share oral histories? What does it look like to maintain and build these threads back that have been cut from us? And so for me, that includes a lot of research, a lot of, kind of variant research, taking little rabbit holes of threads of information, tying things together. I make large-scale paintings based on anonymous photographs of African diasporic people within a very particular piece of time, right? I work generally like right when the same thing, right when photography was born in the world, you know, daguerreotypes and tintypes and ambrotypes, you know, this time when the image really was being made, you know, made of Black, Indigenous, and, you know, brown people, you know, sometimes in their own image and sometimes not, you know, and so looking at the very beginning of photography and what images are made there, taking those images and making them into large-scale archival oil paintings in old Renaissance style that will hopefully last hundreds of years and kind of blast through time, you know, in this way, you know, this reclamation of time and throwing it into our futures through archival practice. I'm also really interested and engaged in living histories and living in the body inside history. And so the collaborative work that, you know, I'm working with Stages of Tectonic Blackness includes myself, another mover, dancer, performance artist, Miles Tokno, a phenomenal composer and musician, viola player, Lazarus Nance Letcher, and filmmaker MK, all of us, you know, New Mexico-based, you know, Black artists, you know, working together to touch into these historical sites, these land spaces, these sort of intersections of land and time and place here in New Mexico that have a significant history that has been, you know, disappeared. So the piece that's showing here is made in Blackdom, New Mexico, which is a town that was erected here in New Mexico in the 1900s, 1903, or some of the very first patents, but had, you know, drawn families from all across the South, all across the East to create an independent town, a freedom town, a town that was focused on, you know, education and farming and advanced, you know, knowledge of land, you know, stewardship and relationships to water, you know, to education, you know, to community building and, you know, sort of foundational structuring. This Black town that within 30 years, from racism, lack of water, and, you know, all of the stresses of being a Black town in New Mexico, eventually changed, dissipated, grew roots in other places, but lost that space of Blackdom. So that land now, almost a ghost land. In my historical reclamation work, the vision was to, what does it look like to bring Black bodies back to that land? What is 100 years later? Can we move our bodies on that land and feel the bodies of our ancestors? And how do we, you know, through doing that movement, you know, create, you know, a new opening for descendants? You know, these kind of ways of moving through time, space, and land, you know, through action. And so the action was to dance, to pray, to mourn, to move, to be with land. And so what you see in the film here is a 30-minute piece of an 8-hour ritual presencing within that land. And it's really signature for a lot of my work that I do outside of this. And in it is, you know, finding those places where both land, time, history, and our present bodies interface.
Love it. Thank you, Nikesha. When I was looking at it the first time, because we were in conversation when Nikesha was headed down to Blackton with her team, and I couldn't go, scheduling conflicts. But when I got to sit in the gallery and look at the finished product and think to myself, my people come from South Carolina, that like when you're driving in a car past a field and people are working, like it is choreography. You know, if you really think about it, like if you turn your car radio down and it's like on mute, they're dancing. It was spectacular. So let's introduce on the far end. Hello, Gina, way down there. Hello.
Hi. I'm Gina Penn, and I am from Oakland, California. Not originally, but it's where I am now. I'm originally from Maryland, DC area, and I primarily work in the medium of collage. These are my pieces back here. And I was part of the Arts Meets History Lab, New Mexico, which was a wonderful experience. I'm just working with, a bunch of other artists, seeing everyone's interest. But one of the kind of main pushes of the project was to look at New Mexico and find your people and your stories of your people in New Mexico. So for me, my work is centered in the Black diaspora, whether it's Africa, the Caribbean, South America, and of course the United States. And I'm especially interested in 20th century urban history. That's where I just find a lot of life, I find a connection to. So when the project came up, Albuquerque just made perfect sense to me. I was like, what was going on in Albuquerque? And the access to the archives was phenomenal, but it was interesting because I had a different experience than Leo, where I didn't have a breadth of images. And I really had to kind of see what was there and kind of create a story and do a lot of my own research and talk to people in the community and kind of piece out what was interesting to me and what seemed to be kind of a missing story. And I became interested in the idea of the South Broadway community and how it developed and how people moved here and what they came here for and what they built. But not only that, then what was lost, whether it was lost to inertia, gentrification, the violence of eminent domain, or just whatever what was there and what did we lose in that. Coming from the East Coast, and I moved to California. I was initially in LA for about a decade, and then I've been in the Bay Area for a decade. I put myself in a similar position as the people I imagine moving here. Like, what is it moving across the country? How does the landscape change? How does interacting with other cultures that aren't similar to what you had from where you were to now where you are, and how do you build a life in this new place, and kind of find yourself, but also mold yourself into what's there. So it's kind of the essence of this particular project that I was working on, and you guys all shouted out collaborators. Jill Hardkey, who's the archivist at the museum, was phenomenal. She was just a great person to work with. I think she was excited about it. She would send me stuff and look at this, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then when the time came to come here and do work on the ground, she was just great. I mean, I got so much research. It was amazing. If you go into the archives, there's a whole wall of phone books from the last 100 years. And I would sit there, I'd just pick a time and I would just go down lists, because what I was doing is trying to identify locations of these 4 sites that I had chosen. And through time, the streets have been changed, things have been torn down, roads have been added and subtracted. So it was just this really kind of, this minutia of going line by line through the phone books. But it was really an interesting process, because in it I learned just about the city and how the city grew and who was who, not just within the Black community, but just the community in general. What was important, look at a phone book in the 40s and then look at one in the 60s. Well, that business isn't there anymore. This has moved. And so you kind of see how the small stories of people are part of the larger stories of the community. But a lot of times those stories don't get amplified. And that's where my interest lies, in amplifying the small stories of people, and in my case, like I said, of the diaspora, that are interwoven, that are part of the building of communities, that are part of building of this nation, that I think generally do get erased for a myriad of reasons, racism. And I think it's interesting to work on a project like this while we're in this current climate, where history is now being challenged, and what is history, and what is the correct history. So I feel grateful to have had this opportunity.
Thank you for that.
Whoa, let's turn it on.
Sorry for those watching at home. That was my voiceover work there. I was practicing. But Gina, I think that thank you for including Black New Mexico and the diaspora, I feel like sometimes we don't get included, so thank you for that. And as a transplant myself, coming from the East Coast, yeah, when you're used to seeing black bodies in a certain context, and then you come somewhere like this, if you're from Philadelphia, 16 years ago, and you're seeing those same people with a different backdrop. It's, yeah, it's kind of iconoclastic, and I think you represented that very well, so thank you for that. So here we go, team. We're gonna do like a round robin. I feel like since Leo went first, maybe we'll set Nikesha up first on this one. But it'll be effectively the same question for each of you. I only tweaked the words a little bit based on your work in the exhibition. So starting with you, Nikesha, how does land hold history? You talked a little bit about that intersectionality between bodies and place, and you guys were out there on the land. What did it tell you, and how does that present itself in your work?
Yeah, it's one of those hard, not even hard questions, but is, our relationship to land, how, like culturally, our relationship and understanding of what land is and how, it is living, varies for all of us, right? Like what we're carrying in our understanding of land from, a long line of ancestry of conquest of land versus a long line of history of reverence of land, lines that, like, our relationship is so very, very different. For me, particularly, I'm really interested, being someone who is from the diaspora, and in that, my historical connections to land are so vastly connected and disconnected, right? Like that understanding of place, or a place my people came from, like really breaks down after a few generations. Like it's hard to claim the plantation as my land or my people's land, and across the waters, it's all conjecture at this point, what is our land and what is not, as I've tried. The little baby bird that walks around saying, like, "Are you my mother? Are you my mother?" Do you know this book? Do you remember that? There's a real truth to that feeling as a diasporic body of, like, are you my mother? Is this land my mother? And I remember my family actually comes from Blackdom, New Mexico. And again, what does that mean, right? My family at one point said, this is home. Tried to put roots down and tried to make a place that was called safe and that they could grow in, right? And so I can point to that and say, there's a place where roots went in and it was good, people grew, I came from, this place. And before that, there was another place, and even in the plantation, there was a place that we called home. We made home, and we made love, and we made care and joy, and so what is land? How does land hold history? I feel like it has to relate somewhere in our bodies. It has to relate somewhere in our stories. How we find those things is the journey. How we understand, how we find them in our bodies is the journey. And I'm brought to, just quickly, because it's on the tip of my tongue, the work of Catherine McKittrick, who is a phenomenal philosopher, writer, historian, who really forwarded the ideas of Black feminist geography, and wrote a book called Daemonic Grounds, the Black women and the cartographies of struggle. And really talking about the ways that geographies are made also through story, through the sufferings that we carry. Diasporic bodies, make lines of histories in the ground. The places where Black bodies, Broadway here in Albuquerque, made a place on a map somewhere. There's a map of Black presence in this place. There's a map of Black presence here. It might not be on the map we all know, but there's a map there. There's a map of the struggles of our stories. And so, those relationships of histories come in layers that we often don't see,
McKittrick, was that what you?
Catherine McKittrick.
Somebody has to write that down because I'm working up here, and I'm gonna need that name to go look up later. Thank you. Thank you for that, Nyquisha. And we'll keep going that way in the same. We'll just keep cycling. And it speaks to me that connection directly to Gina's work. Yeah, like so. Different question. The question I wrote down was, how does a neighborhood and the functional purpose of the structures within it hold history?
See, I had answered her question in my head. I think that...
It's really the same question, right?
Right.
Because they're land.
Right, their land. So I think for me what it says, and it does go for the neighborhood and it goes for the structure, what I was thinking is, and in the story I was telling, it holds hope and opportunity. Because you're looking at people who largely are migrating from the south, coming to New Mexico to have an opportunity. They're looking for the opportunity to homestead, to build land, to get out of the oppressive Jim Crow South. A big theme, if you see, is kind of the railroads. The trains were a huge part of what brought black bodies to New Mexico, both as workers, but also just physically. How'd you get there? I took the train, except for those who walked. And so I think that's what a lot of the land that I was looking at is about, the dreams and the aspirations for something different that they weren't able to find from wherever they were coming from. But it's also still, it's not all rosy. You come here and there's still going to be conflict, there's still going to be challenges. I think that, within the whole narrative of the triculture experience in New Mexico, feeling that your voice isn't, being heard, that you don't have as much political power or, just a social presence as maybe other groups in the community. So how do you work through that? But I think it's also about this new experience of building the new with the next generation, creating, from, being from the South, but now you're creating, New Mexicans, Albuquerqueans, and what is their experience going to be, and how much do you bring with you? How much do you take from what's here to create something new? There's this interesting story I learned about in my research about a family called the Hutchinsons, and they had a contracting business. And they were originally from Virginia, where they were all kind of tobacco farmers, and they moved west and they came here. And one of the stories they talk about is building their house and learning how to make adobe, which obviously, if you're from the East, that's not what we do. And so learning this thing and becoming, not only good at it, but good enough to then start a business. And they would talk about these parties that were held where everybody would come and, make adobe in the back of the trucks and cure the bricks and, this whole thing. So I really see that it's about coming to a place with your baggage, laying it down, and, opening it up for the community and incorporating what's here and creating a new history. Who are we now? This is who we are now.
I love that. Hold on to that, because you're already ahead. That's the third question. You guys, to preview. What do we want the histories to be in the future, based on the fact that they've all contributed to the existing canon. So thank you, Gina. Thank you for that. And if you're unfamiliar, like when I moved here 16 years ago from the East Coast, about what's an adobe brick and how much work is that? What does it look like? What does it smell like? I believe there's some downstairs in the exhibit, yes. So you can go see them in real time if you like that. So Leo, same question, right? What history does the land hold for you? I modified it to say, what history does a tree hold?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you can't necessarily single out a tree, right? When we're talking about that, we're talking about the environment, which there's a whole lot of other plants and beings that, it's a system. So I think that's one thing that, I was kind of thinking about too when I was doing this project. There was a reason that I named it what it was named, and so that was part of my process of thinking about the cultural like worldview from, you know, the Hickory perspective. And, you know, we had a name for it, you know, and so it was that important. And so I think, I was thinking about language a lot, but also, you know, what Nyquisha had said about that, the body and the body memory, the DNA memory, that was really interesting, and how we're connected to that place and how that history is, you know, carried on through generations. You know, a lot of indigenous communities practice like oral histories, so we don't have like, you know, photographs that we can reference, or, you know, we don't have like books or publications. So a lot of the stories are passed down, and that's kind of how our history is carried on, you know. And so we can think of it like that in terms of like the oral history, or we can look at the environment. And so what I was picking up from that, you know, that specific instance, was the relationship with that being, you know, the trees. And yeah, I think it's you know, just a really interesting like case study almost, you know, like when we look at just a specific relationship in this whole environment, what can we pick out from there? And, you know, I was able to pull out these stories which are really interesting, but there's a whole lot of other stories tied to the land, you know. And I go back to language because, like, you know, we have name for that practice. We have place names. We have names for other communities, and yeah, I just think it's a great like indicator for me to like recognize that was part of like our worldview and our understanding of our identity as Hickory. But yeah, I mean, like it's an interesting like document, you know, like it recorded that history, which is really interesting, and I'm sure there's a lot of other like things that we can look at besides trees that hold stories. There's also other tribes that have like similar practices too. So I thought that was really interesting in my research. I think I answered the question, right? Like,
Absolutely. And I, you know, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Leo, that there was some sort of, you know, political skerfuffle, and in the fact that they used the trees not just for things like sustenance, but that they were putting messages in them, almost protected them from loggers. Is that true? Like, was the actual glyphing of the trees a way to protect the trees from being, you know, commodified or used for whatever, for profit?
I'm not too sure about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's interesting thoughts to like think about.
I may have made it up, but I think I was reading. I thought I read that on the label. So that actually segues greatly, and so can we start with Gina on this one? I think that segues greatly to the next question, medium, because for Leo the tree is medium, but also the androtypes are medium too, like photography is the medium, right? I think for Gina yours is collage, for Nikesha yours is a multitude of things, including movement and film. Medium is always a critical component of meaning making for both the artist and the audience, right? What does the medium of in your case, Gina, collage, do for the meaning you made and the meaning you want the audience to make from your work?
I'll speak first kind of in general. I'm attracted to collage largely because I look to images as what I call my source images, and when I'm kind of hunting and gathering for source images, this was a different process than I usually do. Generally, I'm kind of pulling from, you know, popular magazines, Life magazines, Ebony magazines. One of my favorite sources is to go to these kind of anthropological coffee table books that were done in like the 50s and 60s that, you know, are supposedly showing, you know, the wilds of Africa. And what I like to do is, you know, take the subjects and pull them out of the context, the gaze that the photographer or the anthropologist or whomever initially designed it to be, and take them out of it and just allow you to see the subject for what they are against, you know, usually it's an abstracted watercolor background. But I am a historian by training. That's what I did in undergrad and grad school. So I'm always looking kind of to the material, you know, culture of the past, because there is some element of truth. Whether it's presented truthfully or not, the fact is this person existed and we can see them. from this moment, and I want to carry it forward. I also use collage because I think in this digital age, a lot of things are getting lost. I mean, from one end of the spectrum, we're just being bombarded with images constantly, you know, but also a lot of the physical images are being lost to us. You know, they're in moldy, you know, magazine boxes in someone's basement. They're in archives that the public might not even realize they have access to, so don't seek them out. So I wanted to take the images to engage the public, to present them in a manner that hopefully will excite and interest people to dig deeper and go further. So that's kind of my thing.
Nice, and I appreciate you shouting out the Albuquerque Museum. I know they were part of the project along with Artist Lab, right? And that's 516 and the National Arts Meets History Initiative. But in my former life, like a month ago, I used to work for the city, and I worked for the team that helped administrate the museum. And yeah, Jill Harkey's the bomb. She's the bomb. So Leo, you're next. We'll give Nyquisha last on this one. But same question, right? If the medium is important, you chose photography, and you said you did it with partners, with the team, but you chose photography and ambrotypes. What does that add to the story, that the meaning that you're making from what you found and the meaning you want people to take away?
Yeah, so I think the medium was really interesting in my project. So, you know, we talked about the trees as being, you know, kind of a medium in its own self, like an archive. And when I was looking through the actual archives at the photo museum, I ran into these ambrotypes, and I was just super interested in them. And as I did like more history, you know, you find out more about the practice and the time frame that was developed, that technology. One of the things that really was interesting was that, you know, I guess being like a designer, like we're always kind of challenged as indigenous designers on representation, right, in design, and how do we represent like indigenous peoples. And part of, you know, what kind of like sparked that too was also like finding that Edward Curtis, who's like a pretty well-known photographer of Native Americans, not only in terms of representation, but also like how do I like navigate that space as an artist. But as I learned more about the medium, you know, I really enjoyed it, and it really added to the concept that I was pushing forward in a lot of ways. And then it also like pushes back on that practice of photography and like kind of going against, you know, what people, I guess, how people perceive like indigenous peoples. And so kind of just, you know, appropriating that medium and using it for my own usage, which was an interesting like path to go forward. Instead of you know, having portraits of like Native Americans, it was really centering on portraits of trees, which you know, my hope was that it really for the viewer like helps them question like what's going on, thinking about the medium and how that connects to indigenous peoples, but also thinking about the concept and the content of like what am I actually looking at here, and what is the narrative that's put forth. I mean, it's a little encoded, but it's you know, if you take in all of the content that accompanies, it really is an interesting story. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways that it connects with the medium. So I just thought that was really a beautiful thing to come together, because, well, the ambrotype is like a positive. So you have to have a negative and a positive to create the image. And then also, like there's tree varnish too that helps like seal the ambrotype, and there's lavender too that's mixed in to make it a sealant for the ambrotype. So it's just really interesting like chemistry, and then also like it really aligned with the concept of the cambium and how you know, the tree is always a part of the process.
That's just good general wisdom. It takes the negative and the positive to make the image. Can we take that home? Take that home, people at home. And I do remember this from the label Leo, unless I'm making this up too. But yeah, and Nikesha spoke to it actually a little bit earlier, that that in the early days of photography, we were made to pose and look nostalgic, and so to change the gaze is an act of reclamation in and of itself, to appropriate the appropriation. Okay, we'll get that later. We'll get that right later. For Nikesha, same question, right? The medium, yours is very multi-medium. I mean, there was dance, there was music, right? In the meaning making, there's film in the meaning making. How did that make meaning for you? And what meaning are you trying to make for the audience through those medium?
Yeah, it's really, to say like, what is the medium? It's like, oh, it's all this, it's all that, but that actually, like, the most like succinct way to understand it is that the medium is time. And that's really important when talking about place and talking about history and talking about, all of these things, is like, how are we really using time? How are we reclaiming time? How are we, seeing and perceiving time in a way that is outside of this master narrative, right? And I think that's what I seek to do in my work in varying ways. So with the film work, we are, one, again, like, as someone, that is seeped in the diasporic understanding, one of the things is this idea that we're cut from time because we're cut from place. We're cut from a continuity of time, a continuity of history. That our history dissolves and frays at its edges is actually a dissolving of time, and our ability to hold time, through in a continuous line. And so the work that I'm doing, I really look at it as an Afrofuturist lens, because that Afrofuturist lens, says, the linear time doesn't exist. I think it's also in, so many of our indigenous understandings, is that the linear time doesn't exist. And so what does that mean? Like, how can we reclaim histories actually outside of linear time? How can we say, no, just because I don't have a continuous line back, I'm not cut. It just means I'm free from the constraints of time. And so the work doing time-based medium, like film, which is really a teeny piece of a 12-hour ritual, already you're starting to understand, like, selective history, selective time. The things that happened on that land, you'll never know. None of us will know, but the moments that we experience them. What you'll know is the little bit that we chose to call history to make a film for you. So you're seeing these, like, pieces of our selective understanding of history and time played out. The piece is intentionally timeless. I made all the costumes, and they're based on very particular 1900s workwear that would have been worn by the people that lived on that land, but made with these bright gold and copper materials, and indigo and denims, that bring a whole other timescape, materials that couldn't have existed then, but shapes and patterns that are reminiscent of this past time. So you're already sort of messing with what's being seen and felt. The MK's film work is ethereal, close-ups of seeds dropping that could have been happening at any moment in our history, and the sound of the wind, which is timeless, like, as a constant. And so my medium would be time. My medium is about breaking time, reclaiming time, reworking time, knowing that all the things I'm doing right now in this present moment are not only affecting the futures, but are actually, through, like, reworking in the past, affecting this present moment. Like, it's possible to change it, like, to go back. Just to tell y'all, it's possible.
So I'm only going to ask one more, and then it's your turn. I know I'm hogging it all up. That's what panel hosts do. It's funny Nikesha mentioned that, because if I had a fourth question, it was going to kind of be around that, like, can we change history by our interpretation of it? And this question is all about kind of where we started. This, and Gina already alluded to it. What do we add to the canon, or what have they added to the existing canon of history, or history as it's told, right? And obviously, there was something observed to be missing or misinterpreted, their art is attempting to solve for that, but also, right, if time is the medium, I love that. One of the things I thought about when I was doing my homework too is that like, history is time travel. But for you guys, what do you want? Like 20 years from now, this exhibit will still be circulating the planet. It'll go into bigger and better places than 516, although there aren't many. And what are the people then supposed to learn? Like, what's the future supposed to learn from this? And Leo, you get that one first, and then we'll go down the line.
Yeah, I think, adding to the canon is just our history. There's a lot of histories out there, and I think through this project I was hoping to have like a more complete understanding of the environment here in New Mexico, and I think that's where I kind of started at, and I think there's a lot of things that came from it, like I do think it is kind of like a exercise in like critical thinking, and how we're looking at the pieces, but also like socially engaging of like, what's the next artist gonna do in response to this? How does this like mark a spot in the practice, and how is someone gonna take these ideas and push them to the next level, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, I think that's what I generally think for the piece that I put forward.
As something's happening on Central, I think that's already interesting. And Nikesha, the same question, but I think it's already interesting because I don't know that, and this is a question, this is for us all to ponder. I don't know that when decisions were made about the history that was going to be told before we were here to go to school and learn it, that they necessarily did that, thinking about how the future will reinterpret it or use it. I think there was, in the conversation, I think you mentioned it, Gina, around Confederate monuments that we were having in this country very enthusiastically a few summers ago, that was the question. The question was, were these things intended to be permanent? Was the story intended to like be forever? Or was it for a future generation to figure out how to recontextualize it? So that made me think. Thank you. Thank you for that, Leo. Nikesha, same question for you. What future history are you making right now?
Ooh, yeah, I'm still like learning about this. Again, time. it's really big. It's a really big concept, and I want to also just shout out. I'm in this beautiful exchange right now as a time surveyor. As a part of a project that was created by Black Quantum Futurisms, which is a phenomenal duo, Rashida Phillips and Moore Mother. They are doing a huge conference in the middle of April in New York on this very thing, on Black time, and understandings of, really breaking our temporal understandings open. And I've been learning so much. And one of the things that, an orientation that Rashida was talking about was, like when we really do break this linear idea of like my past is behind me, I'm in my present and I'm looking towards my future, when you just stop that, because it's a structure that is actually not really helpful to us, like when we break that and even just turn a little bit, like turn our orientation and look and imagine everything in front of me is my past, what is behind me is my future. How can we actually begin to navigate with that orientation? What does the canon even mean? What does legacy even mean? When we actually face our history head on, when we walk fully into it, as, the way that we are creating our presence. It's a profound shift of consciousness, and so for me, I'm not sure what will happen, like what the traces will be, but I know that as I walk fully without like any blinders on into the understandings of our histories, that whatever will emerge will be more whole than it could have been if I had my history sort of in my blind side or at my back.
I don't want to follow
You
that.
take that, yeah. I was like, Yeah, orientation, disorientation, that.
I think for me, what I would hope with the work that was created is, my objective is to show we were here. And we had a part of building, wherever communities. It's interesting, as you look through history, as it was taught to us in the public school systems of America, it's if you are a person of color, or if you're a person of a marginalized group, you do not see yourself except for in the stories of tragedy and trauma. And that's not who we are. That's not the whole of our existence. It's very real. It's very much a part of our story, but that's not it. We, as you're saying, we build families, we love each other, we create communities, we create amazing art, we create place, and that's just what I'm looking to show with this work and other work that I create, is that we were here, and despite the prevailing pressures to erase the story or diminish the story, you can't, because, we will rise and continue, and we're here. We were here, and we're going to be here, and that's the story. Exactly.
And interesting, as you shared in your introduction, we could talk offline. I was like, why did you choose Albuquerque? But what's interesting about that is that these stories you're telling about these, pioneering Black families, right, in what is modern day Albuquerque, and that reminds me, land acknowledgement, shout out to the T-Wish people that were here long before that, but they didn't tell it. They are, or maybe they are telling it and there's no audience for it, right? But you're not their direct descendant. You are family of the diaspora, but so even if you try to erase us, right? They tried to bury us, we were seeds, that whole thing. Someone else is going to tell my story, even if you think you finished me off.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And I think that the story across this country, the flavor's different. It might not have chilies. It might have greens. It might whatever it is, but the story is similar. So we're connected in that sense. I can see stories of my family. Actually, the one piece, the green piece at the end, the band on the top is my grandfather's band. And I chose that because in that particular piece, that's the Bailey House, which was a rooming house. And one thing that they did is that they housed bands that would come through Albuquerque. Now, I don't know if my grandfather ever came through Albuquerque, but I thought of that. I thought of when he traveled, he would have to seek out, their band would have to seek out similar things. So these stories are all of our stories. They are through line through the history of this country. And I forgot where we started, but that's where I'm at.
You know what's crazy about that? And so, yeah, we got to let them ask questions, right? But what's crazy about that, if I can, because you just melted my brain, can I melt yours back? Is that when I was taking notes on this yesterday, and it said, I forget what the matriarch's name is, something Bailey.
Medora Bailey.
Medora Bailey. I literally texted my friend and former employer, Dr. Harold Bailey, who used to be the director of the Office of African American Affairs here and is now the director of the NAACP, and I was like, you need to come to this panel tomorrow and meet this artist. And so he was unable to come, but I think...
Is that family?
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know. Y'all might be kinfolk. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's great.
Or at least your ancestors played cards together or something, right? So hey, audience, look at y'all. Look as good as when we left you. There's a question right there.
So, thank you. My name's Catherine Maria Elena Corva. I grew up in Albuquerque. I was born and raised here, baptized at Old Town. Through school, was told by many of my white teachers, you need to go away. There's so much out in the world for you. You don't want to stay here. Here, my place, my blessed origin. And I went away to the east to meet the cultures out there. And that was impressive. Mostly, strikingly, for the absence of stories of the native people there, and which pushed me back home and learning more about the stories we weren't taught in school, about what this nation that took this territory, the Tiwa territory and other territories, by force and through war. We didn't come by choice. And tried to disassociate so many of our peoples and make us diaspora, and have succeeded in so many individual ways. That scar and that need runs so deep, and I am so grateful to be from this place, this spectacular land with its connective trees that sustain us, and your work spoke to that so beautifully. And your work spoke, particularly your choreography of the loss of leaving and trying to find and planting, and all that is so important for us to hear again and again. And your reminder of these places that were built on other places that are continually displaced and destroyed for the new, and the rush for the sexy over the people who originated here out of the earth, and the losses and cruelties that have pitted us against each other, including, I think, Buffalo Soldiers actually against the Apache, that have harmed our relations. But what I've come to say of Albuquerque is that we are a place, an outpost on the great American trade route. And we have always had people who are from here. And we have always learned to welcome people who are new, because that is how we grow and how we learn and how we have such great music, because the highways come through here and always have. And we have always learned to live with the extraordinary and the way we have always done things. And we are learning to gain our voice as the multiplex of here that is here. But I am also processing issues of, when you say underrepresentation, and there are three people who define themselves in one group. There's nobody who represents the Henisoro, our slave story, and only one who represents deep, long history, all the way back to the trees, deep into the earth here. And us coming up with ways, like this beautiful exhibition, to come and wrestle with that is so sacred. And I'm so grateful for the continuing opportunities for us to be titled.
Thank you. And Suzanne, we didn't say in the beginning, thank you. We didn't say in the beginning the curators, right? Because I feel like there's a connection, like who said let's put all these histories together in one exhibit. So I know Guzman, but I don't remember.
Well, Vicenti he directs a national initiative called Art Meets History, and he works with museums across the country to bring collections and historic content into the present moment. And so this is really a process that he's developed, and in working with him, we invited Alicia Inez Guzman, who lives in Santa Fe, to work together with him in that process. But it's really motivated by the idea that we there are multiple histories, and that's what the project is really about, is highlighting the completely separate histories that different people have experienced.
Yeah, and I think it was in your opening remarks, Gina. And then later, I think Nikesha. So, like struggling with that complete history versus whole history, right? And so there can be a whole history that is incomplete, right? And so complete is kind of, that's decided, somebody else will decide that, right? Right, but like how, is there always room for more, and that the aspiration is to tell a whole, inclusive, if you will, history. Yeah, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. I also
You wanna-
want to reiterate, thank you guys for coming to Albuquerque and coming here for this beautiful panel. Something that I align with all of your artworks is that at some point all of you have confronted the accessibility of place. And being that it's often, an indigenous belief that place is tied to time, how do we move forward to allow more accessibility when so much of that history is oftentimes kept close to the heart? A lot of times through trauma. So how do you guys move forward in that, in allowing that accessibility to come forward?
I'll grab the mic and they will answer.
Yeah, sorry, let me just rethink about the question for a moment. So accessibility
Of place,
of place and how that's connected to
history and time.
history and time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, I really like this idea of like interconnectedness. We all have kind of like an understanding in the Southwest. Like we don't own like landmarks, and so there's you go around and I'm a good example where the Hickory are nomadic, right? So we've been moving through this area for a long time. Like we don't necessarily own the land. Like we traverse the land and we're part of that environment. And so in a lot of ways, like we're touching on these places, and it's part of like an understanding and a system. And that's what I really, take from my own like understanding, my own identity. And part of this project is me like reconnecting with that. Like before this, while we were doing the program, I was living in Chicago, and I live in Vancouver right now, and so it's an opportunity for me to like reconnect with my roots, and allowing this kind of like art meets history prompts to like provide that opportunity to reconnect with the land and reconnect with the people, and reconsider these like interconnectedness, right? Like so we were always friends of the Pueblos, and when we think about the Taos corridor, and just our general nomadic like patterns, we would run into the Pueblos, the Spaniards, the Genízaros, other like nomadic tribes, the Utes, the Comanches. So at one time or another, like we all kind of lived in this place, and we all like take something. We all have kind of that in ourselves too. So I think I know that trauma is like really hard to like move past, but I think for me like this was almost like a sense of healing, and being able to like get past that. Like, oh, I'm not like close to my culture as I want to be, but I use this opportunity to say, okay, well, through this I'm able to like understand not only myself better, but understand like my relatives and my family and this place that I'm so connected to. Like even though I'm living in Vancouver, like this is home still, I just don't ever see it another way. It's always going to be in my heart. And so I hope that other like practitioners can like take that too for themselves, and like connect with the land, but also connect with their communities and their self, and how to use this as an example of like how I can proceed forward with practice.
I want to just kind of jump off of that too, that place of interconnectedness and accessibility, because I think it's really, sometimes I think of it almost also like a holographic reality, right? Where, especially also like and coming from like a diasporic understanding, right? Where people have been moved, out of these senses of place, like I talked about that, where's my mother, like where's home, and how does home imprint itself in our bodies, right? Like, so to know you come from a place, like if you have grown up in a place, your grandparents grew up in that place and your great-grandparents, and that land is like ingrained in your understanding of sense of self and place and home. Like, when you don't have that, like, how do you carry it with you? Like, if you're moved from one place to another, like, can home go with you, right? And I think that, like I said before, our diasporic bodies kind of do that. Like, we unconsciously or consciously, we create these things that keep us rooted in whatever our sense of home or place is, right? And I think that, it, like I said, that holographic map, you can really actualize, I think, that reality, especially when working with trauma. Like, if I kind of think about that cartographies of struggle idea that Catherine McKittrick talks about, like, if I can say, imagine a land that I would call home, or my land, I could like look at the map of Albuquerque or the map of northern New Mexico, or like our indigenous lands. Or I can look at this map of say one of the places in Ghana. Who knows? Like, I can see this land and say this land is mine. Can I then like transpose that land onto my body, like literally, like be like, oh, up here are the northern mountains, and then the Rio Grande flows down this part of my body and it's like hanging out in my kidneys here. Like, can I literally put the map of this land space into my physical body, and can I carry that with me? Can I look at the places of trauma of my people? This town was destroyed. These people, this whole place was massacred. And then also like the personal traumas that I carry from, my own life, experiences and the disruptions in my family or my community, the endless Black death of my brothers and sisters. Like, can I look at those traumas as sites also on this map and navigate them in my body? Can I navigate them in the way I move? Can I navigate them, so this like holographic relationship both to place, land, time, trauma, all of it we can carry with us. So I think as far as accessibility, like when I can't get to that land, like Blackdom, just saying quick, Blackdom is not easy to get to. You can't just go there. It's actually landlocked, thousands of acres that are owned by white oil ranchers, literally, and has been landlocked in private property for the last 100 years. This little teeny place that was a Black site of freedom is isolated. The only building on the entire property, like for as far as the eye can see, is the prison, the Roswell prison, which, again, was built on Black land, and so like that's inaccessible. It's inaccessible. I had to go through so many hoops, so many people, so many red tape, even jumping a fence at the last minute to get into this place. But we made it and we got there. But if you can't get there, if you can't reach home, how do you reach home where you are?
I don't have much to add. These guys are great. But I will say, similar to the situation with Blackdom, is of the 3 of the 4 places that I was focusing on in my work no longer exist. The structures are gone. And one is a private home, which you obviously can't, unless you know them, can't go up there. So I think what I hope to do and what I hope to make accessible to people about the place is to honor the place and my work, and to create a memory and to establish that, these places existed, they were important, they were built for various, reasons, and they were here. So.
The mic is yours, audience. Do I have another question? We just want to capture the audio for the folks at home. Daniel, yes.
quickly, we're saying go Leo. And it's a beautiful conversation. Thank you to all the artists and speakers. Haley Binns asks, what are some territories, physical or non-physical, do you see people of color making today that will be our legacy tomorrow? What are some of the territories you wish to make with your art? And what will our legacy be tomorrow?
You got the shout out.
Fan club. My mic is on.
Yeah, can you reread the question really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some territories, physical or non-physical, that you see people of color making today? And what will our legacy be tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I feel it's like fair game, I think where we're at right now, in terms of like indigenous people and people of color, like there is that self-determination, like what we do and what we want to do, like we have that agency to do it. There's kind of like not a whole lot of stuff like holding us back right now, which I really like. There's a lot more opportunity than ever for like Black, Indigenous, and people of color to like enter spaces like these, or to have opportunities in education, or even roles in like galleries, and that's not something that was ever like easy to access. I think I was fortunate to like fall into like a role as an exhibit designer, because it's like where do you even get like an education like designing exhibits? But I fell into that role, and just saying that I was going to do that, like I ended up doing that, which is, it's such a great thing to know, as 516, puts on a lot of exhibits. But yeah, I think, allowing yourself to, follow your intuition and follow, where you're going, where your practice is leading you, and give yourself that freedom, because I mean, like even in this instance, I was testing like photography, like design is like by nature like interdisciplinary, and so I can be like an illustrator, I can do layouts, I can design compositions, or I can take photography. But in this instance, like I was investigating like photography, and I was able to like push back on like things that I was like going through. I was doing the research, and just realizing it like a real project, like taking it seriously, taking myself seriously, and having the patience to like, do the research and push through as a real thing, which is, what I encourage other artists to do as well. Like, whatever it is that your practice is, like, allow yourself to do that to the extreme.
I'll be just quick. I think that, like, Leo said, that it really, almost every arena, there are incredibly profound people of color that are forging new territories, like in everything, from technology to art to, politics to design to land, to, rest practices. I mean, everything. There are Black, Indigenous, brown folks of color that are really making new territories every day. And so in philosophy, put your finger down anywhere, you'll find some brilliant person of color that is innovating that field. So I think those legacies will carry on in the future. I think we are forging those territories right now. I think it's, up to us, as folks in our communities to look for those people, to actually, like, do it. But whatever your subject is that you're into, find that Black, brown, person of color that is breaking through in new ground there, and yeah, just celebrate it, because that territory will be and is all of our future legacies.
And I'll just add to that. I think where we're really also seeing it is, especially in the last 5-10 years, but really last 5 years, is our voice. I think that Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer communities, the disabled communities. I think everyone is finally just saying, this is enough. We're not going to continue to try to fit into the square hole anymore. We are enough as we are, and we are magnificent, and we have so much to contribute, and we have so much to contribute despite everything that has happened to our communities throughout history, and no longer feeling the need for validation from the mainstream, and like you said, and from that, people are just creating amazing things.
Yes, agreed. And just bringing a different analysis, right? Like that different analysis that comes from different experiences, good and bad, right? Like Gina was saying, get some diversity in your schools of thought. And we're not asking anymore. We're not invited. We build our own. The only place where that's difficult is the Supreme Court. I don't know if you've been following that. But other places, just build your own. Just build your own.
Good evening. My question, the various methodologies that each of you brought, and I want to give gratitude in regards to bringing to our attention to a lot of faces, communities that that were spoken of. And I did some research on Audley Loloma, and she was a clay artist who taught at IAIA from 62 to 85. And part of the research, it was challenging to find information because she was kind of invisible. And because she was listed as Mrs. Charles Loloma. And that was a patriarchy within, and she broke away from the mold of clay bowls. She delved into figurative work. But I'm just curious, there was so much within the process. I think, Nikesha, you had mentioned threading through this process of research, and I'm curious with all of you, as I see this work here, and from Maryland, DC, I met with David Driscoll a month prior to his death, and I was in grad school at that time. And so I really feel connected. It's the first time I've seen this. I've just kind of been in hiding. And but I just really want to thank you, each and every one of you, all the intellectual labor, artistic labor that you've contributed to your work. And my question is, what manifested during this process that you didn't expect?
I'll go first. One thing for me that really manifested in the research and in working with the Albuquerque Museum archives, as I said before, for me was the lack of photos of the Black community, and not just Albuquerque, because they have it from the greater New Mexico region, and it really spoke to me about how we insert ourselves into the narrative of history. And it really had me thinking about collections and archival work, and really about encouraging all people, but for my case, looking at the Black community, to put ourselves in these spaces. These are not sacred spaces, archives and whatnot. These are spaces that belong to all of us, and especially when they're archives that revolve around a city of a place, to contribute to them and to be a part of it and say, again, it's my theme. We were here, and this is who we are, and we were part of building this space. And so, it's not necessarily a matter of, dropping off 1,000 photos to an archive, but, selecting, a handful of photos of your family, of your community, that help create a broader picture, because, everyone love to say representation matters in the context of people seeing themselves, but I think that representation also matters in the context of other people seeing you, that you are part of the story and that it's known that you're part of the story. So that was one thing, a takeaway from my research.
Yeah, I love the question too, because there is so much for me, digging deep into these different threads of histories. It was really that, like, it surprised me, like, how much is actually there that we don't access. Like, we can get to it. There is a lot there. There's a lot that's not there, but there's a lot that is there. There's a lot more than people realize is there. And so, like, even if it's just like starting with Google, but like how you get into those research spaces, how you utilize the accesses that we might have through institutions, to be able to get more information, that following of the line. Like, I was surprised at how much was present that wasn't present, really, in our story. And I really love that thought, of just how do we insert ourselves back into our continued archives. And this is just a side note, but it was actually really cool. I got a link recently somebody sent me from Wikipedia. It is Wikipedia that has all of these stories of people, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous folks that don't have photos because photos didn't exist then, or these photos don't exist of them, but they're people who did huge, amazing things for our society, but there's no images. So they're asking artists to actually recreate images of these people, or to draw or paint or insert some of their own interpretations of our historical figures, particularly our Black, Brown, and people of color in our historical narratives. I thought that was pretty cool, like as another way to also insert ourselves back in.
Before, and worked with these kind of like colonial practices of collecting things, and so there was a lot of stuff that I could have responded to. I think what I picked was really what spoke to me the most. But in that whole process, what manifested that I didn't really plan for was the connection to people in this, connecting not only with our groups, but having the opportunity to collect on a public forum, and then also in a lot of ways community building. Like I mentioned, my piece was a collaboration, but it wasn't initially planned as a collaboration, and connecting with my friends and telling them what my ideas were, and them believing me and believing in that was really great, and I think it made it even more meaningful for me. So it's almost more important than the actual piece is that the community building that we were able to kind of come together and do something with this, and yeah, I do have a different appreciation for photography now, I'm not just shooting off photos with my iPhone, but really thinking about imagery, and then yeah, also I'm gonna remember this, I'm gonna remember spending time with Kevin and spending time with Quinn to actually produce the work, and just knowing that that's how I'm gonna remember it, and I'm not gonna forget it. So it's way different than looking at a photograph, and so I think that's what I didn't expect in this whole kind of project.
How are we on time?
We should probably be winding down.
We should be winding down?
Yeah.
We have one more question. I saw it. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing. I was actually listening to the live stream and came in because I had registered on YouTube. So I want to go back to accessibility, and I've heard access a couple times, and you mentioned disability. How are you all in your practice so far working to include the disabled community and people with disabilities? Thanks.
It's in the work is particularly the work that I did here with the Blackdom performance, our group Stages of Tectonic Blackness has done this work in various places. At this point, we've had one here in Albuquerque in the Piedra Lisa sort of trailhead area, the Blackdom site, and then also in Santa Fe at a gallery space. And as far as like creating our like performance art spaces that are accessible, that was really, really important to us as a collective. Like, what does that look like? How do we create, you know, accessible spaces, especially when we're working in nature, we're working in public spaces. And it, you know, again, is really different depending on where it is. We found, you know, finding just like the lateral spaces of connectivity through virtual and online spaces so that folks that can't, you know, come in person have access is very important. Being able to create, you know, works that, like the Blackdom piece was inaccessible to all public, really, because we were 2.5 miles way out in, you know, in the middle of nowhere. So it was very important for us to make a film that could be able to be showed to, you know, to many people. The Piedra Lisa piece, you know, we, you know, actually worked with a lot of folks to be able to make sure that we could, you know, get people into the space. It determined where we were, how we, you know, how we created access, you know, where people could park, you know, what type of, you know, mobility was needed, you know, a lot of communication. I think it's just that understanding of foundationally always looking at like how we are accessible to all bodies, to all capacities, you know, and doing the extra work. Not even extra work, it really is like the necessary foundational work to be able to make sure that whatever we're doing is accessible.
That was good, and I think for me, because I create two-dimensional work that finds itself in gallery spaces, it's not something I've thought about, and I appreciate that, because I want to think about that, and I want to think about how my work speaks to all communities. Not just in terms of, you know, physical accessibility, but, you know, sighted accessibility, and so yeah, it's something to think about, and moving forward, I would want to consider that in the work that I make.
A big part of this too is like the website. You know, I think that's a great thing that, you know, Rick was thinking out when he was putting this together. It's like, how do we make this more accessible? You know, it's already hard for people to, you know, go out and like do things because of the pandemic. You know, my community is like 3 hours north of here, so like, they're, you know, it's hard for them to come down and actually, you know, partake in this event. So I think just the way that they've structured it today, you know, we were thinking about that, of like how we're, you know, being forward and making this information available. And then probably the usual things that 516 does to like, you know, support accessibility. But, you know, I didn't have too much a part in that as well. I think in my own project, it was similar to Nyquisha's, of like bringing the wild into the space. You know, like a lot of these trees are very remote, like you can't easily like access them. Like if you were, you know, in a wheelchair, or you know, I had any type of like trouble with like getting out to that place. My hope was to bring those stories into this space so that it is more accessible. But yeah, I could probably do better, you know, in terms of like, you know, approaching like hearing impaired or vision impairment in the work. But you know, even this talk too is going to be available too. So that's, I think we're trying to be like forward thinking in how we approach this project.
And before we thank our panelists, you know, I just want to add as well, it was mentioned earlier, I think Gina mentioned it, that how do we, not just, right, making the work that we do in whatever spaces, in whatever communities we say we represent, how is that accessible, but how do we also, as artists, art makers, content creators, galleries, city bureaucrats that run museums, how do we work with people of different abilities to help them tell their own, right? It's nice to consider them, to have considerations for them as audience, but how do we have other considerations for them too as makers and creators, and how do we support that if we have, a privilege of a different ability or different access? So I wanted to add that in. It's a conversation that even as I stepped away from the city, the 4 years I was there, museums and galleries tend to have the same conversations, and there was in 2020, that was the conversation. And you guys might remember the hashtag museums so white, hurt my feelings. I was like, what am I, chopped liver over here? But but they were right, and we had conversations about how do we do better, and there's a long way to go. I mean, I think the Albuquerque Museum is doing good work, and they were doing good work before the summer of 2020, but something about, outside pressure makes everybody move a little faster, even city government. So with that, I want to thank our team here at 516. Can we make some noise for Suzanne, Kevin, Claude's gone, Daniel, who made sure that the folks who are on the camera got to participate in a meaningful way. You all for being here, and the biggest round of applause for our panel here. Make some noise for Vicenti, Nikesha Breeze, and Gina Penn. Do take one of their postcards. If you go to the website that Suzanne was talking about, you'll see that there's actually kind of a postcard image click through for all the artists in the exhibit, but you came here to see them. So take one of those when you go. Tell somebody who didn't come, haha, you missed it, and then send them to the website. And Suzanne, I'll let you have the last word.
Thank you so much, all of you. That was an amazing conversation. I just want to invite you to our next talk on Thursday, April 28th at 6 o'clock. The co-curator Rick Cassini-Cador will be here, and our state historian Rob Martinez will be here as well. And 3 of the artists in the show, Joanna Keene Lopez, Margarita Paz Pedro, and Marlena Robbins. So that'll be a really interesting conversation called How Do We Do History? And then on May 12th is the last talk, and it's called Ciboleros and Comancheros, Commerce, Identity, and History. And that's with the photo archivist at the Albuquerque Museum, Jill Hartke, and the artist Juanita Lavati, and co-curator Alicia Inez Guzman. So please come back for those things, and thank you all for being here. Thank you.